Hello and welcome to Crash Course Metal Volume 2 Shock Rock, the most comprehensive docu-series on heavy metal and hard rock history ever made. We are here at the world-famous Rainbow Bar and Grill, located on the Sunset Strip in Hollywood, California. This docu-series will focus on the pioneers of the shock rock genre that eventually led to the likes of Alice Cooper, the New York Dolls, Kiss, W.A.S.P, and of course, Ozzy Osbourne. Take advantage of a buy one, get one half off sale on killer t-shirts from coastlinemall.com for all of our Crash Course Metal fans. You won't want to miss out. In this episode, we will cover the early history of the shock rock genre, going back over 40 years to its infamous beginnings and its most iconic figures. You should probably put your kids in the other room because we are about to explore the origins of shock rock and the history of the most shocking artists of their time.
Shock rock is a term used to describe artists who combine hard rock and heavy metal music with elements of theatrical shock value in live performances. Shock rock first appeared as a loose genre term during the early 1970s. It mainly referred to glam rock musicians of that era. Shock rock borrows sounds and styles previously covered in Crash Course Metal Volume 1 Early Heavy Metal. Those sounds are thick, heavy guitars that are highly amplified and distorted.
Beyond the sounds of shock rock is an entire theatrical production. Shock rock's shock appeal varies from decade to decade, but generally involves issues of sex and/or violence that are designed to push the current limits of decency. This usually comes in the form of coffins, skulls, smoke bombs, fire, makeup, and knives. Shock rock would also use extremely elaborate stage sets that would sometimes incorporate elements of medieval disciplinary devices such as guillotines and whipping posts. Electric chairs and chainsaws were later added for extra effect. Those who did not use big sets chose to look shocking by cross-dressing or wearing extreme costumes or makeup.
Most shock rock musicians are equally influenced by the elements they loved about old school horror films, mixed with the shock appeal of heavy metal music.
Shock rock's early artists did not want to give their audiences the old Hollywood-era Addams Family Munsters version of rock and roll.
They preferred the darker sides, like in horror themes such as Jack the Ripper. This gave the artist a multitude of characters to base songs and/or stage and costumes around. Shock rock's sound and style leaned toward heavy metal music due to its shock value and high energy. Controversy and shock rock seemed to go hand in hand. The press and pop culture were immediately drawn into this new exciting breed of rock music. Ultimately, shock rock is life imitating art using pop culture as its stage. That's why shock rock continues to capture headlines in the American and international press.
Screamin' Jay Hawkins was quite possibly the first shock rocker. He achieved success with his 1956 hit, I Put a Spell on You. Hawkins began his stage show where he'd emerge from a coffin. He'd sing into a skull, and he'd also set off smoke bombs, among other gimmicks. An English version of this character was Screamin' Lord Sutch, who performed a similar routine during the 1960s. Lord Sutch borrowed themes from Jack the Ripper to create a freakish and sometimes terrifying stage show that kept audiences on the edge of their seats.
The 1960s brought several proto-shock rock artists. In the UK, The Who often destroyed their instruments for shock value. Arthur Brown felt that his hit song Fire needed to be accented by wearing a flaming headpiece. In the US, Jimi Hendrix set his guitar on fire at the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967. Also in the US, Detroit musician Iggy Pop's violent, psychotic live persona did not need props, though peanut butter and raw meat were used as body rub and audience-bound missiles at one point. All this to inspire awe and often real fear from a live performance.
With a career spanning the mid-1960s to recent years, Alice Cooper refined and defined shock rock. In the early 1970s, Cooper's unique brand of heavy metal, complete with elaborate, satirical, and highly controversial live performances, were the sensation of the day. Combine that with the cross-dressing, part punk, part rock, part glam confusion of the New York Dolls, and you have some pretty powerful sources to draw inspiration from for many future shock rock artists.
It wasn't until Kiss took over the genre did shock rock get an extreme shot of adrenaline, fire, and makeup, with no one coming close to the band's level of commercial success and live audience draw until 1980. It took one of the founders of heavy metal to bring shock rock into the 80s. When Ozzy Osbourne, formerly of Black Sabbath, signed as a solo artist, his shock rock status was eternally immortalized. Ozzy thought it would be a good time to shock the record execs at a meeting by releasing some doves to fly around the room, and it's alleged that he then grabbed one of the doves and bit its head off. He then spat it out in the room in front of everybody. Then, with blood still dripping from his lips, a security guard came to remove him. On the way out, he then grabbed another dove, bit the head off another one as he was swept away. And when the New York Dolls needed a replacement guitarist for Johnny Thunders, Blackie Lawless was man enough to step in and dress in drag, although the stint only lasted with the Dolls for 2 weeks.
In 1982, Blackie Lawless would form one of the most controversial bands of all time, W.A.S.P. W.A.S.P's act was so offensive they caught Congress's attention and were cited as one of the top offending heavy metal artists by the PMRC in the mid-1980s. The Parents Music Resource Center, or the PMRC, was an American committee formed in 1985 by 4 women. The most recognizable would be Tipper Gore, wife of Senator and later Vice President Al Gore. The PMRC claimed that popular music, and especially rock and heavy metal music, was partially responsible for an increase in rape, teenage pregnancy, and teen suicide. The group's mission was to educate and inform parents about the growing trends in music towards racy lyrics that glamorize the darker elements of society. Their other mission was to seek the censorship and rating of music. Originally born as Vincent Damon Furnier, Alice Cooper is known for a stage show that features guillotines, electric chairs, fake blood, and boa constrictors. Cooper drew equally from heavy metal, garage rock, horror films, and vaudeville to create a theatrical brand of rock music that would become known as shock rock. In 1967, the band began making visits to Los Angeles, California to play shows and eventually relocate. After several band name changes, Alice Cooper was finally adopted as the band's name, and Vincent Furnier also adopted the name as his own. Soon after, the band managed to strike an audition with composer and renowned record producer Frank Zappa, who was looking to sign up bizarre music acts for his new record label, Straight Records. For the audition, Zappa told them to come by his house at 7 o'clock. The band mistakenly assumed he meant 7 a.m. Waking Zappa up from his slumber, a band that was willing to play that particular brand of psychedelic rock at 7 in the morning, a time unbeknownst to most in the rock music world, impressed him enough to sign the band to a 3-album deal. Alice Cooper's first album, Pretty's For You, was released in 1969. And though it touched the U.S. charts for 1 week at number 193, was ultimately a critical and commercial failure.
In 1970, after their first 2 albums on Straight Records, the band teamed up with fledgling producer Bob Ezrin for their 3rd album, the final of 3 for their original Straight Records contract, to be entitled Love It to Death. This album would be the first of 8 Alice Cooper group and solo albums done with Ezrin. Ezrin is credited with helping create and develop the band's definitive sound. Their first hit single soon followed, 1971's I'm 18. New York Dolls are a rock band formed in New York City in 1971. The band found little commercial success during their existence, but the New York Dolls set up much of what was to come in the punk rock era and even later. The Dolls' over-the-top cross-dressing influenced the look of many new wave and glam metal groups, and their shambling, sloppy but high-energetic playing style set the tone for many later rock and roll bands. The Dolls looked like a gang of transvestites who had broken into the Rolling Stones and Mark Bolan's wardrobe trunks and made it even more androgynous and exaggerated. This was best described by journalists as still shocking today, devastating then. The original lineup comprised of singer David Johansen, guitarist Johnny Thunders, Sylvain, bass guitarist Arthur Killer Kane, and drummer Billy Mercia. The original lineup's first performance was on Christmas Eve, 1971, at a homeless shelter, the infamous Endicott Hotel. They got their big break when Rod Stewart invited them to open for him at a London concert. Shortly thereafter, Billy Mercia died of an accidental suffocation after he passed out from drugs and alcohol.
The band was influenced by vintage rhythm and blues, the early Rolling Stones, classic American girl group songs, and anarchic post-psychedelic bands such as the MC5 and the Stooges. Johansen's energy made up for what was a weak singing voice. Johnny Thunder's fuzzy guitar sound became a near-instant band trademark, as did Sylvain's minimalistic rhythm guitar, Arthur's bouncing bass lines, and Nolan's tom-tom heavy drumming style. They have also been noted as a primary influence for the band Kiss. In late 1972, Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley placed an ad in Rolling Stone, seen by Peter Criss, a veteran drummer from the New York club scene. Criss auditioned for and joined the new version of Wicked Lester. The trio focused on a much harder style of rock than Wicked Lester played. Inspired by the theatrics of the New York Dolls, Wicked Lester also began experimenting with their image by wearing makeup and various outfits. In January 1974, the group added lead guitarist Paul Ace Frehley. The eccentric Frehley impressed the group with his first audition, although he showed up wearing two different sneakers, one red and one orange. He also began warming up on his guitar while another guitarist was being auditioned by the band. This, however, did not affect his audition, and in fact, Ace Frehley became the new lead guitarist. Shortly thereafter, the Wicked Lester name was dropped and the band became Kiss. The first Kiss performance was on January 1973 for a small audience at the Coventry in Queens. In March of that year, the band recorded a 5-song demo tape with producer Eddie Kramer, better known as Jimi Hendrix's producer. Kiss's first tour started later that year in 1974.
The band's self-titled debut album, Kiss, was released in February 1974. The record label and Kiss promoted the album heavily throughout the spring and summer of 1974. Despite the publicity and constant touring, Kiss initially sold about 75,000 copies. The band flew to Los Angeles in August 1974 to begin recording their second album, Hotter Than Hell. It was released in October of 1974. With Hotter Than Hell quickly dropping off the charts, Kiss was pulled off of their tour quickly to record a third record. Kiss decided to trade in the murky, distorted guitar sounds of Hotter Than Hell for a cleaner, slightly poppier sound. Dressed to Kill, released in March 1975, fared slightly better commercially than Hotter Than Hell. It also contained what would later become the band's trademark song, Rock and Roll All Night. Although Kiss albums had not proven to be big sellers, the band was quickly gaining a reputation as a top-flight live act. Kiss concerts featured such things as Gene Simmons spitting blood or breathing fire, Ace Frehley soloing as his guitar burst into flames, a light and a smoke bomb were placed inside the guitar's pickups to achieve that effect. Peter Criss's elevating drum riser emitted sparks, and Stanley's Who-style guitar smashing would add shock, and you can't forget the pyrotechnics throughout the whole show.
By late 1975, their record label was nearly bankrupt, and Kiss was in danger of losing their record contract. Both parties desperately needed a commercial breakthrough if they were to survive. That breakthrough came in an unlikely form of a double live album. Kiss wanted to express the excitement felt at their concerts with their live album, released in 1975. Alive achieved quadruple platinum status and spawned Kiss's first top 40 single, a live version of Rock and Roll All Night. It was the first version of Rock and Roll All Night with a guitar solo, and this recording has come to represent the definitive version of the song, replacing the studio original on the radio.
At this point in time, shock rock had no bigger guitar hero than Ace Frehley. His trademark pentatonic and blues-based riffs and solos have been noted as primary influences for future guitar heroes, such as Dimebag Darrell and Slash.
In 1979, Ozzy Osbourne was fired from Black Sabbath, largely due to unreliability from drug abuse. He was replaced by former Rainbow singer Ronnie James Dio. Ozzy Osbourne was forming a new band. Future Slaughter bassist Dana Strum recommended Randy Rhoads to Osbourne. Rhoads got the call for the audition just before his last Quiet Riot gig. He walked in with his guitar and practice amp and started warming up. Osbourne immediately gave him the job. Basically, the story goes, Randy Rhoads tuned up, did a couple of riffs, and Ozzy said, "You got the gig." Randy apparently didn't think that he did much more than that to get the gig. Randy Rhoads' unique neoclassical heavy metal style of playing set him apart from other guitarists of the late 1970s and early 1980s. He was a devoted student of classical guitar technique, and his music often combined classical music influences with heavy metal. While on tour, he would often seek out guitar tutors for lessons.
Rhoads arrived in England in March 1980 to begin work on Ozzy's first album. Rhoads and Osbourne met up with bassist Bob Daisley at an English pub. Osbourne heard good things about Bob Daisley's playing in Rainbow, so he asked him to join the band. Daisley accepted. Osbourne and company auditioned many drummers, but were being pressured by the record company to start recording. Finally, the last drummer on their list, former Uriah Heep drummer Lee Kerslake, got the gig. They also hired keyboardist Don Airey, who had played with Osbourne a few years prior on the Black Sabbath album Never Say Die. They headed into the studio to record the band's debut album, Blizzard of Oz. Propelled by Rhoads' inspiring neoclassical guitar work and highlighting Daisley's contemporary lyrics, the album proved to be an instant hit with rock fans, especially in the USA.
A second album, Diary of a Madman, was considered by some to be an instant rock classic and featured more of Bob Daisley's gifted songwriting and Rhoads' impressive guitar work. Randy Rhoads was ranked as one of the greatest guitarists of all time by Rolling Stone magazine. Its release was met with controversy, however. Although the songs were written and performed by the same four band members who created Blizzard of Oz, the internal album art and credits were seemingly given to Osbourne's new touring band, consisting of the singer and Rhoads, along with former Quiet Riot bassist Rudy Sarzo and drummer Tommy Aldridge, formerly of Black Oak, Arkansas. March 19, 1982. While in Florida for the follow-up album Diary of a Madman tour, and 1 week away from playing Madison Square Garden in New York City, a light aircraft carrying guitarist Randy Rhoads crashed while performing low passes over the band's tour bus. In a prank turned deadly, the left wing of the aircraft clipped the bus and crashed into a tree, and finally a nearby house, killing Rhoads as well as the pilot and the band's hairdresser. Despite his short career, he is cited as an influence by many contemporary heavy metal guitarists. In 1987, Ozzy Osbourne released the Randy Rhoads tribute album to commemorate the 5th anniversary of Rhoads' death.
By now, shock rock has had coffins, smoke, fire helmets, loads of makeup, and at least a couple of genuine guitar heroes. As shocking as all this was, the style had not and probably will never stop one-upping itself, and that brings us to the next band, W.A.S.P. Blackie Lawless has become notorious in the heavy metal community for his live performances and controversial album covers. The band became famous for its raunchy and at times shocking live shows. Lawless was known to tie semi-naked models to a torture rack and hurl raw meat into the audience. Blackie and Ace Frehley were childhood friends from the neighborhood. Blackie even suffered a serious stab wound in a fight that Ace Frehley was rumored to be at. At the age of 14, his father sent him to military school in Florida to learn discipline, but Blackie was soon thrown out.
Before becoming a musician, Lawless had aspirations of playing baseball professionally. At a very young age, Lawless began his music career in one of shock rock's most unique ways. Lawless was in the New York Dolls for about 5 minutes. He knew the Dolls already, but one day he walked into a bar and they were like, "Hey, would you like a job?" He thought they were kidding, but it turned out it was no joke. So for about 15 days in May of 1975, Blackie Lawless played guitar for the New York Dolls, replacing Johnny Thunders at 2 shows during their tour of Florida. Blackie saw Kiss being born, and that is what he identified with. The Dolls were a complete 180 from them, but it was a big stepping stone for him. He did 2 shows with the Dolls, and it's basically what got Blackie Lawless out to California at the ripe age of 19. After the tour, he went to California with Arthur Kane and helped found the Killer Kane Band, where Lawless was the singer.
In 1976, he formed Sister, who are believed to be the first Los Angeles group to use the inverted pentagram as their logo. Randy Piper, later of W.A.S.P, was Sister's second and longest staying guitar player. Lawless's stage antics at the time included lighting his boots on fire, a trick he later gave to Nikki Sixx, and eating live worms. Around 1978, a new lineup was assembled that included the aforementioned Sixx on bass and Lizzie Gray on guitars. This lineup tried to record a few songs, but the outcome was so terrible they decided to scrap the idea altogether. Around that time, Chris Holmes came into the picture for the first time to play guitar. According to Holmes, this lineup managed to at least play live. While playing the local club circuit for about a year, the band landed a reputation as the most outrageous act, which ultimately landed W.A.S.P a major record deal. It was during 1983 that Los Angeles shock rockers W.A.S.P earned their reputation as a no-nonsense act with an unforgettable stage show.
With outrageous costumes and over-the-top antics, W.A.S.P put on one of the most decadent shows ever. Promoters tried to get the band to sign agreements, promising not to torture anyone, release rats, or throw raw meat at the audience. Meanwhile, their debut album, W.A.S.P, achieved gold status in the US and eventually sold more than 1 million copies worldwide. 1985 saw W.A.S.P release their second album, The Last Command. The supercharged sophomore effort would break the top 50 albums sold in Billboard's Top 200 album chart in early 1986. It also sold over 1 million copies, their first album to do so domestically.
Looking for the perfect blend of entertainment and style? Look no further. Introducing CoastlineMall.com, your one-stop destination for DVDs and fashion apparel. Browse our vast collection, from the latest movie releases to the trendiest fashion must-haves. Use the promo code CRASH and when you buy one item, you'll get a second item at a whopping 50% off.